think that'll be good enough. So I want to make sure that obviously you guys have a record of things that are going on in class today, but also you have to understand for all the folks that aren't here, I got to make sure that they stay on the same page as we are. So let's see, first off, so if you haven't already heard, there's a couple of things going on at City Tech as regard to the way we're going to deal with the coronavirus. So first off, beginning tomorrow and running through March 18th, we're going to have a suspension of classes. And it's during that time that I and all the other faculty and administrators here will figure out how to move the majority of our classes to distance learning, meaning that the classes for the large part will be online. We won't be meeting anymore this semester. Beginning then on the 19th of March is when all the classes will then be online. Of course, check with all your professors about what's going on, because like, especially if you have like a lab class or a class that involves some hands-on type activities, there may be exceptions. Do you have a question? Or just like, this like, it's too...
confused about what to do if you have to go into the class.
Right, and it's going to be a lot of different things depending on each class. Like you all know for my class anyways, we're going to be doing everything on Open Lab. So there's not going to be any big drastic change to what we do, except for the fact we won't be having like a regular like meeting. I will be posting the video lectures like before our class time starts. So I've already recorded them. I'll put them up. What I need to think through is a way that it makes it easy for you guys to ask questions of me. I might build in some part of the writing assignments so that you can talk to one another. So you can ask each other questions or find folks that have like shared ideas, or just to get that kind of useful feedback from one another that I might not be able to provide you with. That's what this coming week's going to be for, is me to brainstorm those things, and then I'll be communicating it all to you on Open Lab. So if we look at the calendar, we're going to have that recess to instruction from the 12th until the 18th. Okay, so we won't even really have a class meeting on the 18th. There won't be our class that week. On the 19th is when all the classes will be shifting over to the online instruction. So you should be receiving some emails or some other messages somehow from all your different professors here. I will have contacted you before then to let you know what we're doing. Okay. If you don't hear from a professor, like by the 19th, you might reach out to them and just say, hey, what's going on? I'm concerned, I want to learn, I want to get a good grade, all those types of things. But you should hear something before then. Which means our next class, after today, our next class, which will be virtual, will be on the 25th, okay? So we might be shifting some things around. One of the biggest things that we'll probably have to shift in terms of our class and the assignments is I'd expected us to be able to watch some movies in the class. There are other ways, obviously, you guys can access some of the films. But I do want to give us some thoughts. Not everybody has easy access to be able to check out or rent a movie that I may have assigned. So I may change those to something that's easier for people to get access to. So let me think about that some more. I do think those are useful examples, but I want it to be something that everybody can access, even though we're not all together. Another thing to keep in mind, and to do what you can, is, there's also the reality that by moving to distance learning, all you guys are going to need to have some place that you can work from. You need to have internet connectivity to access the different systems. One of the reasons I like using Open Lab is that at least you can use it with a mobile device. I know it can be a pain in the ass if you had to write your 250-word response to our lecture and readings each week on a phone, but it works a little bit better than that app for Blackboard, in my opinion anyways. I'm a proselytizer of Open Lab. I'm not going to hide that. But just to maybe give you guys a heads up, if you're using Blackboard in your other classes, you probably should go ahead and download the Blackboard app to your phones or your mobile device so that you have access to that. whenever the time comes for it. What else? I guess, I apologize that there's a lot of uncertainty right now. This is completely new. This is not something that CUNY has had to do on this kind of scale before, and there weren't plans developed beforehand. All this stuff is being developed over the last few days. I've been to meetings with the provost here about what to do, and many of my colleagues are working with other people around campus to develop the plan that's going to keep everything on track, because it's one thing for us to cancel classes, but obviously we need to make sure that you're still all meeting the learning outcomes for your classes, so you get the credits on your transcripts at the end of the semester, so that the credits you receive are still accredited by the accrediting institutions that say that your education is meeting certain standards. So it's not like we can just do whatever we want. It has to follow all these different rules and guidelines so that we're doing the right thing by you, but also what you're getting when you're done is going to be the thing that you want, okay? We don't want you to be walking out after the semester and someone telling you someday you got to take this over to get credit for it. That'd be bullshit. We don't want that. So I guess I would just ask a little bit of patience right now for you. I think we're going to be safe with this class, but a little bit of patience maybe with everybody else, because not everybody is already doing some of these things online like I'm doing with our class. Any questions? Maybe I may not be able to answer everything, but if you got questions, I see if I can.
So during the recess, the 12th to 18th, I know there's no classes, but are students still allowed in the building, to use the computer lab or other resources?
I haven't seen an official announcement about that, but my understanding is that at least the library should be open, which means that the building should be open so that we can get to and from the library. And so what I'll do is if I can find an official announcement either in an email that I might receive tonight or tomorrow, or if I can find something on the City Tech website later, I will post that to a new message here whenever I post the video after class of the lecture. Because I want to keep you guys in the loop as much as I can. So anything that I hear that I think you need to know, you might hear it somewhere else, but since I don't know all the different ways that they may send information to you, if I have something that's verified, I'll be posting it here so you can have another look at it, maybe in case you miss it somewhere else. Other questions? Yeah.
So we're starting from tomorrow, we don't come to school?
That's right. So from the 12th to the 18th, that's when we're going to be developing all of our plans for the online teaching. So there won't be any classes meeting here at City Tech. I think the library should be open, so if you do need to access the library to get work done on your own, you should be able to do that, but I'll verify that later and post something to open that. But as far as classes are concerned, there won't be any classes during that week. But classes will then begin again in an online manner on the 19th, that Thursday next week.
Okay, so if you have lab classes and stuff like that, I have to talk to the professor?
Right, and this is where I would suggest maybe a little bit of patience. I don't think you need to panic in any way. It's not your responsibility to find out this on your own. Each of us as instructors should reach out to all of our students to let them know what we're going to be doing. But with a lab class, they're going to have to figure out if part of it can be taught online, because I know some of the I've heard some of the different disciplines on campus that have labs are going to do that. They're going to front load some of the clinical learning parts of the lab now, beginning on the 19th, and then later they're going to roll in some of those labs. So you'll hear something from your professors about what direction they're going to take, but if you haven't heard anything say 17th or 18th, that's when I would suggest maybe just sending a polite email saying, I just want to check in with you to find out what's going on. But you should hear something over the next week from your professors about how to participate in the class, how to participate in the lab.
Okay, then this is just going to be for the rest of the spring?
That's the way it looks. Yeah, it's crazy. This is something brand new, yeah. it's, in a sense, you're thinking of a science fiction title, this is a brave new world, right? But, this is something that things might not, work perfectly. Hmm? When does the semester end? Let's check the syllabus here. Before the coronavirus stuff, our last day was going to be May 20th. And see, this is some of the stuff they have to figure out. If we're taking a week off to figure out how to do online instruction, it could be a week longer to make up for that week. I don't know. But again, once I find out what all the different things, I will be letting you know, at least as far as our class is concerned. Any general information that I can give you all, I'll send out through our Open Lab site. But for right now, for your planning, try to make sure that you have ways lined up that you can get online. Your things that I mentioned in, I think I mentioned in that email last night, and I posted to our Open Lab site. Also, take advantage of any capability you have in your neighborhoods. I mean, as far as I know, the New York Public Library should remain open. The Brooklyn Public Library branches should remain open. There's all those New York City link kiosks everywhere that we can get online with. I've used them before. And even just for practical matters, when I was a student at the University of Liverpool, there would be holidays in the UK. And I still needed to write your research papers, but the goddamn library was closed. And I'm like, fuck, how am I supposed to get online? My dorm internet went down. I'm going crazy. And so I decided, well, I'm just going to find something I can sit on. So I found a crate. I dragged that shit in front of the library's front door. I sat down. I was able to get a signal with my laptop, and I worked right there in front of the library for 6 hours to finish my paper. So I mean, whatever you got to do that's obviously safe too, you do so that you can keep moving ahead with all your classes. It's going to be a challenge for all of us, but I know it's something that we can all overcome too. But it will require all of us together to do that, I think. Other questions about this stuff, about our schedule in general? Everybody's good? All right, so we'll say for right now, for our schedule, since there will be no art class on the 18th, right? So all this stuff for the 18th will be pushed back a week. We're going to move those things to the 25th. Everything that's on the 25th will then be moved to April 1st. By that point, I'm sure I will know when the last day of the semester is. So there's a couple of different ways that we might go. If I know that we're going to maintain the last day of class as the way it's currently scheduled, May 20th, I may just take out one of our films, and that'll catch us up, so that we can stay on track for the rest of the semester. If we're going to get a week extension to the end of the semester, we'll probably try to find maybe different videos that we can watch so that it's easier for everybody to find them and see them. And then everything will just take place a week later than it's currently scheduled. Okay? So I'll keep you guys in the loop on all those things. I won't leave you in the dark. All right, what else? Talked about that. Oh, some other brass tacks things. So, if you brought your notebooks to class today for me to take a look at for the midterm, what I'm going to do is when we start looking at the film serials that I brought, that we're going to watch on the screen tonight, I'll check those off in class. If you don't have your notebooks with you, or if you need a little bit more time, you can see that I've given everybody a 1-week extension. Because I know there's just a lot of crazy shit going on right now, and I don't want anybody to freak out because of my class. There's plenty of other things to freak out about. So you got a 1-week extension, but because we're not meeting anymore, the only way after tonight that you can get your notebook to me is by scanning it into a PDF. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I give you a couple of examples here. And as some of the easier ways. Like you can use Google Drive, the app on your phone, and like you have your notebook in front of you, like just literally, I would stand up like this. I put my notes on the page, on the table, have my phone, open Google Drive, hit that plus sign in the lower right-hand corner, choose Scan Document, and then I just take a picture, go through everything, click the little check mark, meaning I'm finished. It'll ask me to give it a name, and it stitches all those individuals' photos together into a single PDF that you can then send to as an email attachment to me. You got my email address on the syllabus that I handed out, as well as on our Open Lab site. When I receive it by email, I will send you an email reply saying, hey, I received it, and I'll check it out for you. You can also use Dropbox app. It has a built-in PDF scanner. And there's a lot of other apps. I'll give you a link to some that are recommended from PC Magazine that are available for iOS and for Android. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do that. If you happen to have a scanner, like a flat top scanner that's built into your printer, or even a standalone scanner, you can use that too. I mean, it doesn't matter. Any way that you can scan that into a PDF so that I can see what your notes are. Anybody have any questions about that? That's good? Okay. We're going to talk about the research project in a second. We're going to take a look at the videos here in class, but for folks that are watching this online, you can look at number 5 on today's post on Open Lab, and you'll find links for the Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers film serials that I'm going to lecture about in a minute. You see that? I'm talking to the camera. I'm not talking to you guys. This is just a conversation here right now. All right, so that's good. All right, so let's get to the research project. All right, so make sure you do have something to write with so that you can get this into your notes. I'll type all this up later. I just didn't have time to right before class to do it. All right. So, if you go over to our syllabus and scroll down to grading, you'll see under grading, 4th thing down is the research essay, which, like every other major part of our class, is worth 20% of your grade. The purpose of this project is you choose a single work of science fiction, okay? A single work of science fiction that we have not discussed as a reading in the class or as a viewing in the class. So anything that we haven't talked about is fair game. You choose one. And that's the main topic of your essay. And what you do with that example of science fiction that you've selected is you analyze it in terms of it being science fiction. Your job, the kind of argument that you're going to create in this essay, is to convince me that this is a work of science fiction. So that means that you're going to have to explain what science fiction is. So you're probably going to cite some of those definitions of science fiction that I gave you on the handout. You're going to be able to use those as some of your cited sources, which is why I give you not only the quote, but I also gave you that MLA works cited list entry after each of the quotes. Now, after you've developed your definition of science fiction from some of those quotes, you then begin applying it to the science fiction you're analyzing. You'll want to break down the parts of that science fiction and explain how is it science fiction. Are there aliens? Explain what an alien is and how that figures into your work. Is there advanced science and technology? Well, point those things out and explain what those are. Is there, elements that are different than the here and now? You can explain some of those and how that relates to what science fiction is. So before you actually delve into the science fiction that you're going to be analyzing, really read through that list of science fiction definitions, because you get to pick and choose which definitions might be the most useful for your discussion. Because some of the definitions you'll think, well, that's cool and all, but that just really doesn't apply to what I want to talk about. You choose the ones that work best for you. And what I'll do, I'm pretty sure I have it sitting around somewhere. I have an old example of a similar type of an essay that I wrote myself for when, I think I still have it. As long as I still have it, if I don't still have it, I'm going to have to make a new copy, which if I need to do that, I have done that for classes. Because one of the things I believe in is I ask you to do something, I need to have done it myself at least once before. But one way or another, I'll give you an example of kind of what this essay should look like. So that way you can read over and maybe get some ideas about how you can break things down. Now, some of the things you need to keep in your notes about what's involved in this. It needs to be at least 2,500 words long, at least 2,500 words long. What that translates to is about 10 pages double-spaced. Because one page double-spaced is about 250 words each. Okay? It can be longer, but the bare minimum for passing is going to be, it needs to at least be those 2,500 words, 2,500 words. You need to have at least 5 cited sources, meaning something that you've quoted from and you've cited in your works cited list at the end of the essay, in addition to the science fiction you selected for your topic. So essentially you're going to have 6 cited sources minimum. One is the science fiction that you've selected, and the other 5 are going to come from outside sources. Now, of those 5 outside sources, 2 of them can come from that list of definitions that I gave. So I'm giving you 2 of those. You can have more, that's fine, but 2 of those can come from that list. So I'm saving you a little bit of the research already. I've done that lifting for you already. Which leaves you at least 3 sources that need to come from a source in the library, either as a book, as a journal article, or anything else that you find through a library. Okay? So, and it doesn't have to just be the City Tech Library. You can use the Newark Public Library. You can use the Brooklyn Public Library. You can use any of the CUNY libraries. If you're not aware of this, with your City Tech ID, you can use the libraries at the other campuses. The only campus you can't check anything out from would be John Jay. They have special rules because they have all those law books there. But all the other CUNY campuses, you can use their libraries and check stuff out. And if you haven't already done so, I'll show you something else in a second that may be helpful to you. So I always carry my New York Public Library card on my keychain. If you don't have one of these, they're free. You go to the New York Public Library branch, you sign up for it. In addition to signing up for the library card, they also ask you to put in a PIN number. With that PIN number, here's something I want you to put in your notes that you guys can access that might help you, not so much in my class, but in some of your other classes. You can just do a Google search for NYPL space Lynda, L-Y-N-D-A. Canopy?
It's a movie. It's like.
Oh, for like watching movies. Thank you for telling me about that, reminding me about that, because that might be how I might choose movies from there.
You have to do it through City Tech, though.
Okay.
You add your library card number.
Okay.
Professor, is it 2,000 words?
2,500. 2,500. Now, the reason I'm mentioning lynda.com to you guys normally lynda.com is a subscription service to high quality teaching materials. You want to learn how to use like Adobe Creative Suite? They have high quality videos that you can only access through their website to teach you everything from a beginner level to an intermediate level up to an expert level. And they're all subdivided based on like what they expect you to already know. So if I click connect to database, it's going to ask for my library card number, which I will type in. 223-0020. And so for any of your other classes or simply something you might want to learn on your own, this is a super invaluable resource. I've used a lot of this stuff to learn some of the things I know how to do. Not just things that I know how to do like as an instructor, but in other fields. So like if you want to learn how to write like a basic website, you can type in, well if I can type the right letters, HTML. It has topics. You can look at lessons that are on a beginner level, intermediate level, advanced level. You can divide it down to like how long the lessons are. So it's not like you have to like sit there and watch something for 6 hours long. They got it all chunked. So like if you have a few minutes like on the bus or train, you can like get a little bit of knowledge just while you're wasting time rather than like you're playing a clicky game or something, you know? So I mean, this is a really cool resource. You can find this stuff out. If you want to learn, like I mentioned, Adobe Creative, which we have access to this software in a lot of the labs on campus. Do they have something for Mathematica now? They even have like lessons on how to use Wolfram Mathematica, which we also have in the labs for like math classes, physics classes, engineering classes. So I mean, tons and tons of stuff. You click on library, you can see how it's divided up. Here. 3D animation, audio, music, business stuff, CAD, design, developer, like when I want to be a programmer, education, e-learning stuff, IT, marketing, photography, video, and web design stuff. Talks about different software, like if you want to learn how to use like Blender at home, you want to be open source 3D rendering projects, right there. Learning paths, like they also have these guided paths, like you want to know how to become something. They say, well, you need to take this lesson, this lesson, this lesson, this lesson to do that. So a tremendous amount of information there is just for the taking, which otherwise you have to pay a lot of money for. But we get it for free as long as you have a library card. So take advantage of that, because this could come in handy, especially in your other classes. Like say a professor says, you got to make like, a YouTube video for something. Well, they'll show you all the ins and outs from a beginner level on to expert to do that. All right, so that's lynda.com. Thanks for the reminder about canopy. I'll think about that for our videos, see what we can find on there. All right, other things about the essay. So with this essay, I don't want anybody to be thinking like, 5-paragraph essay kind of stuff, but you do need to have a good introduction, and inside that introduction, you need to give me a thesis statement. Okay? That's your argument. A thesis statement can be as simple as saying, in this paper, I argue that the video game World of Warcraft is science fiction. Because, and then I might give some reasons, and those reasons are going to correspond to the paragraphs that follow. Because the thing about World of Warcraft is an interesting edge case, because you have a lot of the fantastic stuff like with elves and magic and whatnot, but there's also different races that use technology in different ways that you would be able to say, well, while World of Warcraft is fantastic in these specific ways, there's also these science and technological elements in the game as well. But that thesis statements, that's where you're throwing the gauntlet down, saying this is what I'm going to prove in this essay. And all you're having to prove is that what you're talking about is science fiction. If you want to play devil's advocate, you can choose to write about something that other people might not think is science fiction. And then you get to make the hard case that it is. So either way, like choosing something that's obviously that everybody will agree is science fiction and you break it down for us is fine. Or you can choose something that people may not automatically consider science fiction. You make the case that it's science fiction. But everything that you say in the paper needs to be backed up by evidence. The evidence comes from like your observations, like you telling us what's going on, what do we see in the science fiction. Also, it can come from those secondary sources, those 5 external sources that you have to include, or more than 5, where you might find someone writing about the book, film, video game, whatever it is that you're researching, and you say, well, so-and-so explains this, and you give a quote from that person where they break down that part of the work you're describing and how it's science fiction. And then you talk about it then in your own words. And so, like I said before, I'm going to give you examples of kind of what this looks like. I hope, though, that you've already had a chance to do some kind of analytical writing, like in English 1101, 1121. But I'll make sure that everybody is able to see what needs to get done on this with some examples as well. And as you work on it, obviously, keep me in the loop about if you have questions. And the only other thing that I would ask is, since we're not meeting in person from now on, if I would need, and I'll send this out as an email to everybody, those folks I haven't already touched base with about what your topic is, I want you to shoot me an email saying, Professor Ellis, I think I'm going to write about this. And you might include some brainstorming you have. And then I'll email you back saying, that's great, that will work perfectly. Or if I have any concern, that's an opportunity for me to give you some more ideas based on what you tell me. So just send me that email so we touch base so you have a good plan for your research project. The sooner you can do that, the better, right? So you don't have to do all this at the very end of the semester. And then the last thing I'll note about your essay is that it needs to follow MLA formatting, okay? And just put in your notes, the only resource you probably need to rely on for this is just do a Google search for Purdue OWL MLA. Purdue OWL MLA. I mean, this website's been around as long as I was, even whenever I was an undergraduate. It continued to evolve and gain more information than it had whenever I was a student. But I highly recommend this as a resource. Though I will say that whenever I was a student, they didn't have these goddamn annoying videos playing in the corners. But you can see on the panel over on the left, everything is accordioned out. An accordion, playing polka music. Right? Okay. So everything's accordioned out, and you can see there's the basic style guide. It gives you information for formatting your quotations. That's when you quote work that you see in the thing that you're going to be talking about or in those secondary sources. And I guess this is a rule of thumb. A rule of thumb is that I encourage you to quote things. For this assignment, I don't want to see any paraphrasing of what someone might say in a work you're quoting from. It's better just to give me a quote so I can see where it's coming from, so you're acknowledging who you're quoting, you're giving them credit for it, that's good. But then afterwards, after you quote it, then explain to me what that quote is about and why it's relevant to what you're talking about. That's when you get to use your own words to explain it. Now I know that depending on the subject in the class, there's certainly times to do paraphrasing, but I think that for our purposes, it's much better to give quotes because that kind of evidence shows your reader that this is coming from the horse's mouth, so to speak. That I can see explicitly what they're saying. I can then read what you have to say about their quote, And then I can make up my mind, like, do these things jive? And without having just to accept what you're telling me. And let's see, you can see here, for the works cited, there's pages on that, like how to do works cited for books, like book with one author, books with more than one author. There's examples on periodicals. Periodicals are journals, magazines, newspapers. Those will be things that you're going to be quoting from, that you find through the library. And they give you examples of what those things should look like. And as you're doing this, if you've got any questions about any of it, just send me an email saying, like, Professor, I got like this quote I want to use. It's from this book or this journal. Give me as much information as you can and say, like, I'm just not figuring it out. I'll then try to find something on the Purdue OWL website to send to you to say, hey, I want you to look specifically at this, because I know you're all bright people. You'll be able to figure it out if maybe you know really where to look. And if you still have trouble with it, then I can help you, like, really explicitly say, this is how it should look like, okay? My main objective is to teach you how to do this through these examples. But I can also help you if, like, you really get lost on something, because I don't want this to be something that totally trips people up. So I think once you use this a little bit, you can figure out the logic of it. And then finally, look over here, is some sample papers. Now, I don't want you to think that your paper needs to have all these crazy-ass boxes everywhere. These are just for explaining what's going on, but you can see, like, how you format your last name and the page number at the top right corner of each page, how you give a name block at the top of the first page, how you give your title of your essay centered on the first page, and then after that, you have your essay that follows. Inside the essay, you can see really good examples of quotations. So you can see how the person wrote some introductory material. This is like in the student's voice. One of these improvements was the development of canals and ski boats, which allowed farmers to, then you see quotation mark, and then they give a quote, sell what was previously been unsellable, and they give, meaning like this is the actual spelling that was in the source they quoted, and resulted in a, quote, substantial increase in a farmer's ability to earn income, end quote, space, and then parentheses. This is what we call a parenthetical citation. It tells me the author's last name they pulled this from, and then the page number it came from in the book or the article that that quote appears in. And then if I go to the very bottom, the last page, this is what your last page will look like. You still got that running header of your last name and page number. You got it titled in the center, works cited, and then you have hanging indents for each of your sources. And I can just scroll down that, and I'll be able to find that D source that the person used, Danoff, Clarence H. They pulled that from a book, Harvard University Press, 1969. So all these examples show you, like, what yours ought to look like from lots of different sources that they're pulling from. And you have some of this stuff, like the hanging indents, MLA, you can also look on lynda.com. You can type MLA into lynda.com, and it's going to pull up even more stuff to help you with this kind of formatting material. The same is true in your other classes. If you're called on to use APA or Chicago, Purdue OWL has those sources as well, and you can look on lynda.com. So there's a lot of places you can get access to the information you need without necessarily having to buy, like, the Chicago Style Guide for $45, or the MLA Handbook for another $25. So again, the research essay is going to be due the last day of class. Now it's going to be, obviously, for everybody due electronically. I'll give you all the details on how to get that to me when we get to the end of the semester, but the main thing is, like, right now, be thinking of a work of science fiction that you want to analyze. It can be a book, it could be a short story, It could be a television show, could be a comic book, could be a video game. But I guess another thing I should mention about that is, like, let's say you want to choose something like, say, a television series to write about. The thing about television series is, like, it can be really long. It can provide you a huge list of examples of science fictional elements to discuss. So don't let what you choose become overwhelming to you for the purposes of our essay, right? Focus on those things that may be the most obvious. And I would recommend, if you choose like a series, pick one episode and just write about that. There will be plenty if you choose the right episode to do that with. You don't have to write about every single episode in the series. Or you might choose several episodes. But like if we're talking like Star Trek The Next Generation, please don't try to write about the whole series. It's too much. It's 7 years worth of episodes and then the movies that followed afterwards to write about. You don't have to do that. That could be overwhelming. The same is true for comic books. I would suggest thinking in terms of like maybe a story arc in a series of comic books rather than looking at a whole series of comic books. Because like, you know, you look at, especially with DC Comics, where you have comics that have been running for decades and decades, that's just too much. And the stories themselves, you get rebooted and started over at different periods. So pick a point and run from that point to where that story arc ends, rather than trying to take on too much. I've mentioned to folks that have spoken with me outside of class, don't discount music. Music is also, there's a lot of good science fiction music. Like David Bowie's, when he did put on the persona of Ziggy Stardust, those songs are very science fictional. Janelle Monáe, with her and the Android Suite songs, like from the beginning of her career, very science fictional. Dirty Computer, also very science fictional. If we look back to like the 70s, in late 60s, I think as well, you have Sun Ra and his orchestra. This is an example of what we call Afrofuturism, science fiction that is made by people of the African diaspora. And all of his songs are very science fictional. So don't think it has to just be a book or a short story or a film or TV show. It can be these other things as well. And you might want to use this essay project as an opportunity to learn about something you don't already know. So dig into Wikipedia and you dive deep into the science fiction entry on there and follow all those links that take you to the subgenres of science fiction. See what's out there. Also, maybe put this in your notes if you need to generate some ideas. Just do a Google search for the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. It's sf-encyclopedia.com. Back in the day, this was a book published like this thick by Peter Nichols, and oh god, it's definitely one of those days when you're not firing all cylinders. Authors about us. John Clute. John Clute and Peter Nichols wrote the original versions. But what they did is they brought it online and got a bunch of other people to help write those entries, and they're updated regularly. So you can think of it kind of like Wikipedia, except they get science fiction experts to do the writing in this thing. So things like you don't only find out about the writers, but you find out about different themes in science fiction. And I guess I'll add this to the list of available sources. You can use this for one of your works cited. So if you find something on the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, because this is a vetted resource, meaning it's a verified resource, one of those cited sources can come from here as well. So you might look up the entry for whoever wrote the book you're studying or made the film you're talking about. You can look up stuff in here and use that. I mentioned this stuff about using library sources, using this as a vetted source. I say that because I don't want folks running off just doing a Google search and using something they find on the first page of results is from some rando .com or some sketch Russian website for a source. There might be something useful there, and I'll admit that some of those things have provided useful leads to me, but usually they point me to things that are actually vetted that I can find in a book or somewhere else that's become buried. So those should not be things you necessarily quote, but you certainly can use Google search results to help lead you to what you need to find. The same is true for Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not something that you would quote from, because Wikipedia is an aggregator of information from other sources. That's why there's that list of sources at the bottom of every Wikipedia entry. It draws from those places. It's not the beginning of that new knowledge. So those would be things that can guide you to something. And I would recommend you using Wikipedia to help you with your research, but don't use it as something you quote from. Other questions about the research essay? And I'll type all this up and get it up on our Open Lab site so it's all like in black and white too, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys leading class today would know what's going on with it. All right, 6:49. All right, so let's do this. Let me give you about like 10 or 15 minutes of lecture, and then after that, we'll take our break, and then when we come back, we'll start watching the science fiction film serials that I'm about to tell you about. So keep out your papers so you can make notes. This won't take very long. And while I'm beginning the lecture, I have the sign-in sheet coming around. So at the end of our last class, I think I'd stopped talking about yellow peril. Is that right? You think so? All right, so for today's class, we're going to be talking about the film versions of pulp SF. Okay, so this is like, where we take the ideas of the pulp, so things that have like low production value, and take them out of those cheaply made pulp magazines and put them up on the silver screen. All right. So today we're watching the first of 3 Flash Gordon serial film adaptations. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to be watching is these Flash Gordon serials. In our last class, I talked about Flash Gordon's starting life as a comic strip, which was in response to the Buck Rogers stories in the pulp science fiction magazines. So these Flash Gordon adaptations include Flash Gordon Space Soldiers, which is what we're going to watch some of today. Flash Gordon Space Soldiers. And Flash Gordon Space Soldiers is made up of 13 two-reel episodes. Reel, R-E-E-L. 2 reel episodes.
How many?
2. I don't have any chalk, so I'll put it up on Microsoft Word.
13 two-reel episodes.
Uh-huh. So like 26 reels. Anybody work in a movie theater before in here? No? It's just so you guys know what I'm talking about. So this is a reel that would be used for 16 millimeter film. These reels that would carry Flash Gordon, I'm not sure, but I would suspect would have been 35 millimeter reels, which would be obviously thicker than these guys. But the celluloid films, essentially like a plastic type material, early plastic material, would wrap around the reel, and then you would use a film projector, which is essentially, you put one reel that has the film. It runs through the machine in front of a light source, a very bright light source, And then as the reel is fed through that and wound onto an empty reel, the light shines through and displays what is in reverse, what's contained on the celluloid strips. Individual frames being played fastly back trick the eye into thinking we're seeing real motion, when really we're just seeing a series of still images, but our eyes and brains don't know that. And so if you imagine two of these guys would make up a single episode of the Flash Gordon film serials. Now that first series that we're going to watch today is from 1936. 1936. And it was made by Universal Pictures. They've been around a long time. The second series is called Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars from 1938. And it has 15 episodes. And then the final series is Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe. I mean, he's moving up in the world, right? Conquers the Universe from 1940. And that has 12 episodes. Now, here's some characteristics I want you guys to know about these things, about these science fiction film serials. The first characteristic of science fiction film serials is that they're released weekly and shown before a feature film. They're released weekly and shown before a feature film. So you have to imagine the beginning of that early part of the 20th century, people didn't have television sets. The way you would see things that were made for in an episodic manner, meaning there's episodes drawn out over time, would be before the main feature, the big film that you might be going to see. Now, what do we see right now before a movie starts in the movie theater? Trailers, right? I mean, we watch 30 fucking minutes of trailers, right? But back in the day, what you would see is maybe a newsreel, which would be essentially like watching CNN or Fox News for 10 minutes, showing you what are the highlights of the news around the world. Then you might see a cartoon, a Tom and Jerry or a Silly Symphonies or a Looney Tunes. Then you might see a Flash Gordon serial episode, and then you get to see the movie you paid your money to see. But the thing is, these episodic things were also draws for people. You got fans that the main reason they began to start going regularly was so they could watch what's going to happen to Flash Gordon in the next episode. And what I'll talk about with these characteristics, one of the big characteristics is that there's cliffhangers. So the second characteristic is that there's cliffhangers. And what a cliffhanger is at the end of each episode, something takes place that isn't resolved. It could be Flash gets injured, or Flash falls down a ravine, or some new monster comes out of the shadows before it cuts off at the end. And we just don't know what happens next. And so the only way you can find out is you come back next week, pay your dime, and see another movie that has this at the beginning of it for the next episode. Now, in addition to it being released weekly before a feature film, second characteristic of cliffhangers, a third characteristic is that they have relatively low cost of production. Relatively low cost of production. I mean, usually what happens when I show these things to students is there's a lot of laughs, it's silly, it looks cheap. It's not like watching the special effects of Star Wars, okay? They're purposely made at a low cost to get the maximum amount of profit out of showing these things. And then tied to that low cost of production is the fourth characteristic, low production value. Low production value. I mean, it looks cheap. What's taking place? And there's a variety of reasons for that. The main reason is that they reuse a lot of special effects throughout the series or between different series. And they also use very simplistic shooting arrangements. Very simplistic shooting arrangements. What I mean by that is like they're probably going to use like one camera and move that camera around, because having two cameras means that you're having to pay the cost of two cameras, two camera operators, and everything that goes along with it. If you got one, it doesn't cost as much. You can move all the actors and everything else around to accommodate that. But that also means in order to make production move fast, is that you're not going to like show like shot counter shot. You're not going to show different angles as much. It's a more boring shooting technique. The more cameras you can have like on a subject that you get to choose between can elevate your production value. And we see a lot of that in contemporary filmmaking, particularly since the advent of digital filmmaking has lowered the cost of shooting with those new technologies. And also lowered like noise issues, heat issues. Because you have to imagine like cameras back then, because they're using film, that film has to run through the camera just the same way as it's running through a film projector. And so it's very noisy, it's very loud, produces heat. And so as a result of that, you don't want to have like 12 cameras around when you're shooting it, because you also have lots of lights that produce a lot of heat. You're just making a very uncomfortable environment that you're making your movie in. So there's these kind of limitations as well that are going on. Now, television copies this idea to bring the audience back from week to week on some series with story arcs. So that whole idea of cliffhangers and episodic shooting is what made television possible. Now, the Flash Gordon science fiction film serial that we're going to watch has these characters and actors. So Flash is played by the actor Buster Crabbe, Bustercrabbe, Buster Crabbe. Now, the neat thing about him is that he was an Olympic swimmer who won the 1932 Olympic gold medal for the 400-meter freestyle competition. So, I mean, they got someone that, like, had that kind of superhero look. And when I say had that superhero look, before this, there wasn't a superhero look. So you can imagine, like, what we see today kind of goes all the way back to these early film serials. We have Emperor Ming, the Merciless, played by Charles Middleton. We have Flash's girlfriend, Dale, played by Jean Rogers. Princess Aura is played by Priscilla Lawson. And Dr. Zarkov is played by Frank Shannon. And I think what we'll do is we'll watch a couple of episodes of Flash, and then we'll watch a couple episodes of Buck Rogers. And so Buck Rogers, just for your notes, is another science fiction film serial that was released in 1939, also by Universal Pictures. And this is important. So remember, Buck Rogers appeared first as a science fiction story in Amazing Stories magazine. Okay? Now, in response to its popularity, another company said, we're going to make our own comic strip that's based on those ideas, but call it Flash Gordon. So you have like these different groups that are making these different science fiction, pulp science fiction characters at that time. Then when Universal Pictures contracts with the Flash Gordon people to make the Flash Gordon serials, they basically get in bed with both parties and then also say, hey, we can make Buck Rogers for you. But the weird thing about it is they cast Buster Crabbe as Buck Rogers in the Buck Rogers serials. So I think for our eyes today, we would probably be like, what the fuck, that's kind of weird. But at the time, this wasn't maybe something too off the cuff. That this was all new, what they were doing. And maybe there wasn't the same sophistication that we have, all the learning that we've had with watching television, streaming television shows, etc. today, to kind of question the motives or also the storytelling strategies of doing that. So Buster Crabbe appears in both of these science fiction serials. First is the hero Flash Gordon, and then is the hero Buck Rogers.
Was there ever a crossover?
As far as I know, there wasn't a crossover. And that's probably where we get back to divisions between the different intellectual properties. But if you think about it today, though, I could see comic book company like what is it? Is it IDW? Yeah, they do lots of different kinds of crossovers. Like you have X-Files and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You have Doctor Who and Star Trek: The Next Generation. A lot of neat stuff like that. That maybe people and also the owners of these intellectual properties are more willing to do that kind of thing because they know that the fans get into it, and if fans are into it, they're going to sell more stuff, and that makes the money and makes them happy. So it's win-win for everybody. But all this was in its infancy at this point with these film serials that we're going to take a look at. Question? No? Any other questions? Everybody's good? All right, so let's take a 10-minute break. It's we'll say it's 7:05. So at 7:15, we'll start the serials. If you happen to have your notebooks for me to grade today, you can just sit them up on the table, and I'll get those back to you today before you guys leave. I'll be grading them while we're watching the film serials.